Now that we have a firm grasp on mixing complementary colors and using color temperature, we need to understand, why do we need all of these things to make something look realistic? When you are shading an object, the first thing you need to look at is the light source so that you can understand how the light is displayed across the object and where the cast shadow will be. On a simple sphere, we can practice all of our colors and how to shade an object of that color. So we will begin with red. On a red sphere, we will want to begin with the local color. The local color is always the main color of the object. So for a red sphere, red is our local color. We will also be using some white for the highlights. So as you can see on this diagram here, this will show us approximately where we should be putting each color. So we'll begin with a highlight. On a sphere, the highlight will be in the upper corner if our light source is here. However, it will not be right along the edge. It will be down in the center, approximately here. So though you won't be able to see it yet, I'm going to add in just a little bit of white. Now I'll begin with my local color. I like to start in the darkest area. That way I can get a better handle on how much pressure I'm using in an area where it won't matter if I pushed it too hard. If my light source is coming from the upper right-hand corner, then my darkest area will be the lower left-hand corner. Again, I'm using a small circular motion of circles right on top of each other to create a more smooth look. If at any time I need to start using a back and forth motion, I want to make sure that I'm using the cross contour of the object, which means how a string might be wrapped around the object. So on the sides, that's going to look like a curve this way. And that curve will get less and less severe as I move to the middle, and then we'll start curving the other way. But I'm going to try to use my small circles in that same general motion. My local color will come up around the sides and across the top. But I want to leave a little bit of extra area around my highlight. Even though my highlight was much smaller than this, I can always go back and add more pigment later. But remember, you can't really remove the pigment once it's there. So now that I have my local color, I'm going to add a little bit more to the bottom where my shadowy area will be. This helps me to establish the look of my shadow before I start adding in more colors. So just with pressure alone, I can start to see how the light will look across my sphere to make it look three-dimensional. After I've added my local color, I'm going to start following some of these examples, and you can do this in any order. I'm a big fan of starting in the darkest area because it's the easiest to fix if I make a mistake. So, the cool temperature of red is is red-violet. So I go up to my red ribbon here, and I see my cool version is red-violet. So I'm going to take my violet pencil, and I'm going to start adding in some shadow. Again, you can see I'm not really pushing hard at all. I'm just tinting the red. I'm using circles and or a cross contour motion. And I'm even letting my violet come all the way down to the bottom because that area is going to get darker later anyway. Then I'm going to add in a little bit of my warm temperature, which is red-orange. So I'm going to leave an extra area of red. As you can see right here, local color. In the middle, where the light is neither making the object brighter, nor is it making it darker, we're just going to see our local color shine through. And then in the lighter area, where the color starts to transition into the highlight, I can add a bit of my warmer value. Now, down in the darkest part of my shadow, I want to really make this look like it's going all the way down to the bottom and rolling underneath. So I'm going to use my complementary color. So as you can see up here, I'm going to be in this region here, somewhere between red mixed with a little and kind of even amounts of the two, depending on how dark I want to make it. So I add just a small sliver, and then I want to use just a really light pressure to make the transition. Just like we talked about up here, we don't want a really harsh line. We want to see things blending together and transitioning smoothly. You can already see the sphere starting to take shape. Next, I'm going to go back to my local color and I'm going to start sandwiching everything together. At this point, my layers start to build up even more, and I'm going to start feeling the waxiness of my pencil. But you can see at no point have I started pushing hard enough to make that really shiny consistency. And I can start reducing my little buffer area just a bit with a very light pressure, because I want my highlight to fade out into my red. So I can go over this with white, and then I start letting the white come out into my red area. Lastly, I'll use my blender to blend everything together. Notice how I always start down in the bottom dark area. And as I apply my blender, you can see how all of the colors and layers underneath start to come together. Be careful when you get to your highlight that your pencil doesn't start to push some of that pigment into your highlight. You want it to stay nice and bright. So now I have a really nice looking three-dimensional sphere. But what about my cast shadow? Well, if I look up at my diagram, I can see that my cast shadow is going to be made up of my color plus its complement. And I'm going to try to use more equal parts, so I'm going for more of this middle section here. So I begin with my red. And as you can see, I'm using the grass green because I want this area to be very dark. And I sandwich more red on top. And instead of using my blender, since I want this to be super dark, I'm just going to keep going over it, alternating between my red and my green. And still until I start to achieve that really, really dark color. I'm going to use the same process on my next color. So I'm going to go down my spectrum and I'm going to create an orange sphere next. So the first step is always local color. I'm going to start in the darkest part of my shape. So if I were shading something other than a sphere, I would just find the darkest area, the darkest shadowy area of that shape, and start there. I'm working in kind of this crescent motion because that is the most conducive to my sphere. I want to go with the contours of the shape. And as I start moving closer to the highlight, I begin using less pressure. And remember, I want that color to come peeking up around the top. And I'm going to leave a buffer zone around my highlight, but then I'll go back and I'll start to create the overall plan for my shadows just by using pressure first. So next I'm going to start looking at my color temperatures. I'm going to start with my cool temperature. So I go over here to orange. My cool temperature is yellow-orange, which might be confusing to some people, but that's what we want to use. So I'll begin by putting some yellow all over the shadowy area. Don't forget, we want to leave an area that's just the local color, which is usually going to be somewhere in the middle. It's the place where the light is not making the color any lighter and the shadow isn't making the color any darker, like a neutral zone. Remember to keep everything blended. We don't want to see stripes. Now my warmer temperature is red-orange. Now I don't want my red to overpower everything, so this is where things get a little bit tricky. Just like with the yellow and just like over here and in here, you don't want to start making things look weird and wonky. So I'm only going to use a very little bit of my red to kind of warm up that area. So really I'm only using the weight of the pencil. This is when gravity's doing all the work. My hand is just guiding the direction and holding the pencil upright. Gravity does everything else. Now, in my darkest areas, I'm going to use some complementary color. So the complement of orange is blue. And if I didn't have my handy little sheet here, I can always use the trick of looking at my primaries, deciding which to make orange, and that leaves me with blue, its complement. So down here in the very bottom, I'm going to add just a little bit of blue. And I don't want to overpower, so I'm barely grazing the surface. Come back up to my highlight. And then I can sandwich everything with more orange. I can start going into my highlight just a little. But I still want to leave a little bit of a bigger area because when I go back with my blender will kind of squish everything in a little bit. So again, I want to make sure my blender is clean. And I can begin bringing everything kind of up to that same consistency. And in my cast shadow, I'm going to use equal parts of my two complementary colors. So I will begin with orange. And then blue. And again, because I just want this to keep getting darker and darker, I don't need to use my blender. I can just keep layering more and more color, alternating between the two complements. By using this method, I can get a more natural looking shadow. As most shadows aren't really solid black. They have a little bit of color to them depending on how much light is peeking in from the other sides. So by using this method, my shadow gets a little bit of tint of my color and looks a little bit more realistic. So you're going to continue using this method all the way down the line. When you get to the last one, you're going to stop. Because for the last one, we'll be discussing how to shade a black object and make it look three-dimensional.